Hi, it's Dwyer. Today is January the 23rd, 2018. GamblersAdvisory.com, free site. DwyerSportsBetting.com, free site. Let's talk about Errol Spence's victory, and it was a dominant one, over Lamont Peterson. Peterson's corner throws in the towel. But first, remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. This is just one man's analysis. Let me say this. I have a video up here online. It's my December 28th, 2017 video, where 22 minutes and 35 seconds into the video, after talking about fighters like Anthony Joshua and some other people, I talk about this fight. And I recommended a bet. The underdog, Lamont Peterson, at 10-1. Yes, 10-1. Hedged with Errol Spence by KO. Now, just understand, if you were a gambler, you were taken care of because the hedge held. Spence did get the KO. I would have been in trouble if Spence had won a decision. But let me just say, while the performance was dominant, and it was very dominant, Spence takes out Lamont Peterson's body, punishes Peterson for trying to get deep in the pocket, right? Lands an assortment of hooks that puff up Peterson's face. If Peterson's body could have gotten puffed up, it would have been puffed up. Peterson hits the canvas in the 5th round, right? Spence looks very strong, and I mean very strong. At 147 pounds, he's a natural-born puncher, right? Peterson was unable to stay deep in the pocket against Spence. Spence punished him. That's the best word that can be used, right? Now, for all of that, let me just make the argument that no world-class fighter against Errol Spence, who has mobility, should be a 10-1 underdog because of parts of Spence's game that, quite frankly, leave him vulnerable to, let's say, someone like a Manny Pacquiao, for example. Understand that Spence, in this Peterson fight, is in hunter mode for the entire fight, right? Because Peterson, who's on his back foot for the first half of his fight against Danny Garcia, makes the absolutely breathtaking decision to try to smother Errol Spence, to try to be deep in the pocket. The first round opens, and you'll notice they're both flat-footed, right? Peterson's not on his back foot. He's not flashing a lot of lateral movement. He's standing there. His game is going to be a vertical game. He's hoping to bend his knees, get inside, smother Spence's punches. So Spence has an opponent in front of him, highly skilled, right? I'm going to disagree with the announcers on the Box Nation telecast, right? Peterson's highly skilled. In my opinion, Peterson has more facets of his game than Errol Spence does. He doesn't have Spence's punch, but Peterson knows more of the nuances. Peterson has gears, right? Back foot, ability to move around the ring that Spence doesn't have. Now, Peterson doesn't use all of them here. He makes a decision that he's going to come straight ahead against Errol Spence. Why? Because I believe if you look at the Kell Brook film, and I took Spence in that fight, right, in Sheffield. But if you look at the Kell Brook film, you're going to notice that Brook, early in that bout, when he comes forward, he's able to split the uprights on Errol Spence, who's not defensively blessed. In other words, Kell Brook comes in, he's able to land some shots flush on Errol Spence, who looks like he's a big-time puncher, but looks like he's hardwired. In other words, I didn't see a lot of adjustments. I didn't see the quickest of reflexes. I thought Kell Brook was the better athlete than Errol Spence. I get the feeling, and I haven't spoken to Barry Hunter, the trainer for Lamont Peterson or Lamont Peterson. I'm just an outsider when it comes to boxing. But I get the feeling that those guys looked at the tape and they understood that Errol Spence was open for counters. Right? They understood that Errol Spence's offensive repertoire consists predominantly of hooks after jabs, right? He jabs you a couple of times, then he's throwing hooks. The hooks are the power punch. Now, because Peterson makes a decision to be in the pocket, Peterson gets hit with the hooks, right? Spence is able to load up. The knockdown is a series of about 4 hooks in the 5th round that Peterson's unprepared for, and Peterson hits the canvas. Now, hindsight's 100%. It's 100%. But knowing that Spence is a hooker, right? Mid-range to short-range hooker. In my opinion, someone who can move around the ring, who senses that Spence doesn't have power outside of a hook. In other words, he's not Vladimir Klitschko, who has a straight right hand, who could hit you from halfway across the ring. He's not Deontay Wilder, who you're way outside and then the guy still hits you and you're like, what? As you're hitting the canvas, right? Think Malik Scott against Deontay Wilder. That's not Spence. Spence's power is local, right? It's local. In other words, you're up around the pocket. You're near Spence's front door. Ooh, the hooks. He can throw hooks at wide angles to hurt you. Right? Now, I believe that leaves the door open wide, for the kind of boxer who can move, who understands that he can fight Spence, but he has to be outside the neighborhood to do so. Then he has to jump in and split the uprights. In other words, hookers, it's left, right, left, right, or in Spence's case, since he's a southpaw, right, left, right, they're throwing it at this angle. Just look at the frame and stuff. Now, could you imagine a Manny Pacquiao who understands spacing a little bit, is jumping around the ring? In other words, Pacquiao's shorter. Getting to his body would be a little bit harder for Spence to find than, let's say, Lamont Peterson, who's taller and has a long upper body, right? A Manny Pacquiao who knows that Spence is trying to land a hook to his body or a hook to the side of his head, right? Who's not going to come straight on with a punch unless it's a jab. In other words, he'll hit you with a straight punch, but it's a jab. It's not a knockout punch. For him to hurt you, it has to be a hook. A guy like a Manny Pacquiao, who's a southpaw just like Spence, in other words, he's not going to be there dazzled by the angles, could if he moves. And I need for Manny to move more than he did against Jeff Horn, right? If he moves and just times the entry point. Because Spence is a guy in hunter mode who's unaccustomed to being hunted, I believe a Manny Pacquiao could jump in and find Spence, dare I say, naked, right down Main Street, and could hit him and hurt him. Let me tell you this fight. I think it's closer than reports. Now, I was traveling. I didn't see the fight live. So I heard that Spence massacred Lamont Peterson. I was shocked. Right? I was expecting a different fight. I know the casino had it 10-1. I was like, look, I thought the fight was going to be competitive. I know Lamont Peterson has more nuances to his game than Errol Spence does. So I'm looking at the film, and there are several times in this fight By several, I mean more than 5 times, folks. Fight's only 7 rounds. Right? There are several times in this fight where Lamont Peterson is able to get up close and land flush. I'm talking about flush on Errol Spence. Now, granted, in a trade of punches, Errol Spence's punches carry more weight. Right? Errol Spence hits like a truck. Lamont Peterson more like a Toyota. Right? So as they trade, okay, I could see a guy like Errol Spence saying, look, you want to trade with me? Okay, let's trade. I think I might come out ahead here. But the point is, Lamont Peterson in the pocket was able to land flush, and I mean flush, on Errol Spence. So, I get the feeling some boxers with more nuances to their game. Terrence Crawford. Right now, Crawford, a little bit risky pick because Spence is clearly big for 147. Crawford's just coming to 147. But a guy like Terrence Crawford, who can throw straight punches, who could also be on his back foot, revisit Crawford against Victor Postal. In other words, Crawford understands a fight's 12 rounds. He doesn't have to get in the pocket in the first third of a fight. He can move around, especially when he knows that his opponent is a hooker who doesn't have a lot of ring coverage. I believe Terrence Crawford gives Errol Spence problems. I believe a Manny Pacquiao gives Errol Spence problems, right? Pacquiao has great feet, folks. He can move. Right? So just picture Pacquiao moving his head. He has a lot of head movement. Picture Pacquiao moving his head. So Errol Spence, who's flat-footed, a little bit too flat-footed. Right? So Errol Spence has a hard time finding Pacquiao. So picture Errol Spence trying to close the distance with Manny Pacquiao. Then picture Pacquiao, as he likes to do, dropping his head and throwing a left hand that's straight. Getting inside on Errol Spence and hitting him the kind of way that Manny Pacquiao hit and dropped Shane Mosley. Right? Let me also say this too. Keith Thurman, I understand he's coming off surgery, right? Whenever you hear that a guy has had surgery, I know everyone around him is going to say he's as good as new. He's ready to fight, right? These fighters don't want to ever admit mortality, right? So a fighter could get hit by a truck, and of course the guy's going to have people in his camp say, oh, he's recovered, right? It's like football players and concussions, right? The guy's a concussion and they say, oh, he'll be ready to play in the fourth quarter. I was, stung, but I could still play, right? The Russell Wilson explanation type thing. Okay, fine. But the bottom line is this. Keith Thurman fought a mid-range hooker, Danny Garcia, right? And the first round's breathtaking because Thurman comes out and he's moving, right? Thurman's a big puncher. But Thurman comes out, is moving a little bit, then comes in straight with a bomb from the outside because he understood against a hooker, you need to split the uprights and you need to cause that hooker to reset, right? It's like guys hooking, you move over here. So then the hooker has to turn and the hooker's hooking again. Hookers don't tend to be up on the balls of their feet. So, let me name another guy who I think would give Errol Spence problems, and that's Shawn Porter, because Porter, like Pacquiao, right, is a little bit shorter. So it's hard to find Porter's body, right? Porter is also sudden. Look at the Porter-Paulie Malignaggi fight. So Porter could be outside and then suddenly inside throwing power shots, right? The only drawback with Porter is we know Manny Pacquiao has the punch. In other words, Pacquiao's outside, then bam. Shane Mosley looks like he's been shot, right? He's on the canvas thinking, wow, what hit me? Right? Shawn Porter doesn't have that kind of power. But understand what Porter could do is jump in, throw a combination, then get back out. Before Errol Spence is able to then regain his balance and from a flat-footed stance, throw hooks. So, Errol Spence is certainly a champion, right? He went to Sheffield and won the title in a different continent. You know, I have the utmost respect for guys who, as challengers, are willing to travel to fight the champion in the champion's backyard and who then win the title, right? And Spence did it by stoppage, not by questionable decision and stuff like that. So I have the utmost respect for Spence, right? Spence's idea of defending his title was to say, hey, Lamont Peterson, you want to trade shots? Let's trade, right? Spence is a man, no doubt about it. He's a lion. He's a young lion in his 20s. But all I'm saying to you is that if you close your eyes, you can see Spence in hunter mode, right? Hunter mode. We've seen guys who are just hunters, right? The question I have is, if Spence gets his bell rung like Thomas the Hitman Hearns did against Ray Leonard in their first fight, right? Hitman, who, as you can imagine, was a big-time hunter, right? That's the nickname, big-time hunter. Hitman then was on his back foot shooting a jab, showing lateral movement. Does Spence have that part of his game? Right? If he's facing a guy, you know, it's a shame we couldn't see Spence against prime Floyd Mayweather. I'd take Mayweather in that fight. For one, Mayweather has a back foot game. Right? Mayweather, faster reflexes than Errol Spence. Right? But more importantly, Mayweather hit his head defensively and protected his body. So I believe Mayweather had the hand speed so that if Spence came in and let's say threw a hook to Mayweather's body, Mayweather would be prepared to counter the hook. So if it's on Mayweather's left side, I believe Mayweather would, again, side profile. You don't want to come in as square, as Lamont Peterson did here. You want to come into a side profile. Doesn't that take away one of the hands on a hooker? Right? I mean, because you can't legally hit a guy in the back. So let's say Spence hunts for Mayweather's head, and Mayweather's like this. I believe Mayweather, who ducks his head and has a shoulder in the way, could time it so that the hook misses him or bounces off a shoulder. Then Mayweather would find Spence, in my opinion, completely naked for Mayweather's left hook. I mean, completely naked. Right? So Spence is, let's just say he's a young champion. But I want people to understand that at the legitimate contender and championship level, in my opinion, no guy should go off where the underdog is a 10-1 underdog. Right? Gamblers were still covered by the hedge. Obviously, Lamont Peterson didn't win the fight. But Spence got the KO. Okay, fine. Count me among those who will look at the odds for the next Spence fight. And if he's fighting a guy who has a back foot game, think about Terence Crawford carefully too, because Crawford's ambidextrous. Right? Who's going to change the angles on Spence? Who's going to look at the film of Spence against Lamont Peterson, and he's going to see moments where Lamont Peterson is this close to Errol Spence and then throws a hook that literally lands on Spence's face. Right? I'm guessing a Crawford is thinking, I can do that. And if I marry it to a strategy of getting out of the pocket before I get hit with Spence's hooks, because Spence is kind of like an avalanche. Right? It's hook, hook, hook. And so what you want to do is get out of there before the first hook lands. So then Spence has to restart. I think Terence Crawford's going to be attracted to the possibility of fighting Errol Spence. I think a Manny Pacquiao, who is trying to hunt down Lomachenko, and I think Pacquiao wins that fight. We'll deal with that in a different video. But a Manny Pacquiao who still wants to fight elite fighters. If a Manny Pacquiao just thinks about the fact that Spence is really a hooking body puncher and that Pacquiao can hide his body, right? Because Pacquiao's shorter, he's quick, he's mobile, he bends at the waist, right? So Pacquiao could hide his body. I can see elite fighters saying, hey, I'll take my chances against Errol Spence. Spence wants to unify at 147. I think there are going to be guys lining up. Finally, let me close with this. Again, there's high risk involved, but this is gambling, right? Mikey Garcia is a little bit smaller than Errol Spence, right? You should think of Spence really as a 154-pounder, not a 147 guy, right? But understand, Mikey has more ring coverage than Errol Spence, right? And so I get the feeling that a Mikey Garcia, same thing with a Deontay Wilder, it's the same kind of effect. A Mikey Garcia from the outside, if he can stay outside, Barry Hunter's pleading with Lamont Peterson to throw his jab. If Mikey Garcia can throw a jab and maintain spacing, right? I'm just saying a Mikey Garcia straight right hand. And that's what they say to throw against southpaws. If it lands as flush on Spence as some of Lamont Peterson's shots landed, who knows? Maybe Mikey adds yet another weight class to his legacy, right? Mikey's at the part of his career where his biggest opponent is his legacy, right? He's just trying to add extra luster to what already is a Hall of Fame career spanning several weight classes. So pay close attention to Errol Spence. One, because Spence is good. But two, because I believe elite fighters looking at his films are seeing holes that they think they might be able to exploit. And so late in this fight, Barry Hunter says to his fighter, look at me, right? He says to Lamont Peterson, look at me, right? And Peterson doesn't want to quit. Peterson's getting beaten up. But in Peterson's mind, he still has a chance because in my opinion, he's out there and he's seeing the holes. You know, it's like flashing light where you're there, then suddenly there's a flash and you're thinking, man, had I thrown the right hand at that moment, I would have hit Spence flush with it, right? 2018 is going to be a year of some big Errol Spence fights. I'm just telling you that when you hear 10-1 and the guy's fighting a real contender, a real elite challenger, you can expect to find me placing a bet on this challenger. Of course, I'll also know to hedge the play with Spence by KO. Let me hear from you. I hope you leave your comments in the comment section to this video. Thanks for stopping by.